Hello.
Hello.
Am I audible? Is everybody audible? Hi.
Yes, everything is fine.
Perfect.
All are requested to keep it mute so that there will be no disturbance from in the background.
Understood, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Allah Akbar.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey Diksha, how are you?
हाँ ठीक है ठीक है.
Hello, Sunil sir. Welcome to the session.
Hello.
Hey, hi Diksha, hi Dr. Sanjeev.
Hello.
Good evening.
How are you? Good.
All good, all good. Thank you so much. How have you been?
Yeah, fine.
Beautiful.
So finally, we have come to the destination to start with.
Yes.
I think we should start or wait for 2 3 minutes. Some more are joining.
So yes, sir. We are waiting for few more people to join.
Okay.
Yeah, hello.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I'm going. Okay. Hello, everyone. Um, Hello, everyone. I'm sorry for the voice disturbance. So, we are going to start the session now. I request all of you to please kindly mute your mics so that we can start with the speaker and the host session. Okay, let me just quickly check. Is everyone on mute? Okay, okay, okay. Yes. Okay. Everyone's on mute. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. So let's start that. Good evening, everyone, and warm welcome on behalf of the Art Park. Art Park is basically a Section 8 company established by Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, to convert the research into innovation, and lot of research work and as well as the manufacturing of the robot, leg robots kind of things, autonomous vehicle is going on at the Art Park. In addition, we have Center of Excellence in Art Park where we have obligation to support any startup entrepreneurs or anyone who is looking in this direction to get into the market, understand the strategy, understand the VC strategy kind of things. And that's why in that direction today we have a very distinguished speaker, Mr. Sunil Kavale, who is the investment manager at Special Invest, a pre-seed stage venture capital firm investing in deep science and deep tech startups in India. He started his career at Toyota India and later worked at an early stage startup before joining Special. So if you need any information about Mr. Sunil, he is very much on LinkedIn, and I requested him basically to keep this talk in such a way that everyone will understand how to reach the VC, what kind of strategy will be required to go to the VC, what kind of pitching will be required, how they can prepare themselves so that there will be a win-win situation. With that, I would like to request Mr. Sunilji to start with. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, audience. Over to you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjeev. Diksha, Dr. Sanjeev, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do this. Great work being done by Art Park, and glad to be a part of the journey, and looking forward to future interactions as well. Maybe given that we have about an hour or so, what I would focus on today is under the umbrella of fundraising strategies for deep tech startups. I will first give a quick primer about maybe what we look at, how we look, who we are and what we do, and probably then quickly talk about our view and our definition of deep tech. And then go into some specific aspects on what to consider before raising capital if you are a deep tech startup, and what sort of preparation that needs to be done, what sort of investors that you need to look out for, what sort of pitch decks need to be prepared, and how do you maintain investor conversations. Those are four broad umbrellas that we will spend time on today. And of course, I'm hoping to wrap this up at the earliest, and open the discussion and answer any questions that you all might have. Having said that, let me begin maybe. So Special is an early stage deep science and deep tech focused venture capital fund. What we do is we invest at the pre-seed and seed stage. These are essentially pre-product and pre-revenue companies where there is a significant amount of technological risk that is still present, and we try to underwrite those technology risks by coming in as a lead investor in the early stage. We are currently investing from our second fund. As you might see, it's a $38 million fund. We have about 17 companies that we've invested from Fund 2. And across Fund 1 and Fund 2, we have over 30 companies, 35 companies almost, that we've invested in. Thematic areas of interest, we largely spend time across areas such as space tech, clean energy and sustainability, life sciences and bio, AI-led software, and manufacturing/industry technologies. What is essentially deep tech for us? We look at deep tech. Our view of deep tech is that these are innovations that are heavily rooted in science and engineering, and essentially focused on solving the major challenges that are faced by humanity. Historically, you will see that most leaps that have happened in humankind have been through the advent of technological innovations. And we believe that there is a great opportunity for India at this point of time to spearhead such technological innovations across the world while building it from India. And we, as an organization, want to enable entrepreneurs who are building such technology stacks. What this looks like is it can be in the form of space tech. Agnicool is a company in our portfolio where they're building rockets that have 3D printed engines to take small satellites for space. After close to 7 years of innovation, they did their first suborbital launch in May of 2024. We've also seen examples in where we have indigenous CAR T cell therapy for cancer treatment, bringing down costs by a factor of 10 at least. We've also seen innovations in green hydrogen, where you can essentially create hydrogen using renewable electricity, but through certain technological innovations, enable this to be done at a fraction of the cost when compared to what is being done in the market today. Fundamentally, deep tech essentially looks to solve large fundamental problems. They're at the convergence of multiple technology stacks. And very importantly, there is a certain amount of defensive intellectual property that is being created. This can be in the form of process IPs, product IPs, certain trade secrets that only that particular team knows, so on and so forth. But essentially, there is something that sets this company apart at a technological level when compared to the others. What this essentially translates into is that even if somebody had $20 million of capital made available to them today, it's not like they will be able to capture the market over the next few months. Because fundamentally, even with the money available, deep tech requires a certain amount of time and effort to build out that technology. Right? And irrespective of money does not essentially solve all problems. Right? That's essentially how deep tech works. It's also at the intersection of multiple ecosystems where you need support from academia, from industry, from government, policy, so on and so forth. And it's also at the intersection of both the physical world and the digital world. Right? Now, I'm going to quickly go into the focus for today's session. Who is this for? Essentially for early stage startups who are building in deep science and deep tech. But when we say early stage, these are also pre-product and pre-revenue stages. And you're essentially raising your first round of capital, particularly focusing on a venture capital firm at this point of time for this session, and not necessarily from grants or angels. Those risk reward matrices work a little differently, and hence for this session we will focus on raising from a venture capital. Now, what will we broadly cover? Like I outlined a little earlier, we will talk about how to prepare for a fundraise, finding the right investors for your startup. We'll talk about what is important for an investor. This will be a tone more or less that I will bring out over the course of the conversation as to what investors look for, and what to bring out in a pitch deck, what to bring out in a data room, and how do you engage with investors during the fundraise and outside of the fundraise as well. Now, why is this important? Why is it important that this sort of an understanding come in, right? So when Dr. Sanjeev and Diksha and the team at ARTtalk essentially wanted to cover this, I thought it was a very relevant topic to be covered. This is more so the case because we've seen very often that I think we are as an ecosystem, India has significant amount of talent to build deep science and deep tech, but somehow there is a gap between, especially during the fundraise, there is a gap between what investors think, what investors want to hear from the founders, or the way that they want to hear from the founders. And the gap exists between that and what founders think investors want to hear, right? So over the course, and this gap, we see that often leads to either the investor not understanding what the startup is building, or the startup feeling that too much of their time and energy is being wasted or being spent with investors who do not necessarily understand what they're building, or it slows down the process because the investor says that, hey, I need some time to develop a thesis, I need to learn more, so on and so forth, and consequently the startup believes that too much of their time is being taken, right? And too much of they're giving so much information, but the investor is not making a decision per se, right? And to address some of these gaps is what I will try to share the views on what an investor would essentially look for when evaluating a startup, and what we have also seen while guiding our portfolio companies to raise their subsequent rounds of capital, right? So it's not necessarily something that what you'll hear from me is not something that is idealistic as such, but rather what we encourage our portfolio companies to also keep in mind while they go out and fundraise. And we've seen that some of these have worked out reasonably successfully for these startups as well when they've gone on to raise their subsequent rounds of capital. after we've done the first investment, right? So this is the context to why we need or why I would want to talk about this particular sets of topics over the course of the session. So first, I think is important essentially preparing for a fundraise. I apologize. Most of these slides will look very plain. I've tried to just distill down the very basic points, and I thought I will elaborate on them as and when they come up. When to raise capital from a VC, I think, is an extremely important step, especially when you're doing the first raise. Why is this important is essentially because sometimes VCs also want to see a certain level of proof that what the startup is essentially communicating or wanting to build is actually possible and can be built. Now, and why is this the case? Because unlike an ecosystem like Silicon Valley in the US, the Indian deep tech ecosystem is still in its nascent stages, but definitely growing. But it's still in its nascent stages in terms of saying that if you come with a presentation and an idea, we may not necessarily be in a position to underwrite that particular technology risk at that particular point. Hence, there would be a certain expectation that some amount of proof be shown that the team is actually capable of building that particular technology, and that particular problem statement is deep enough, and customers care about it. Right? One way to do that is to show that there are smaller wins that you can demonstrate. What do I mean by this? Is that while nobody is expecting you to build a full-fledged final product that is ready to demonstrate or ready to be sold to the customer, can you show that the technology or the science works at a much smaller scale? Right? Let's say, for example, in the case of Nutrace, which is a company in our portfolio building a green hydrogen electrolyzer stack. While a customer may need a few megawatts of electrolyzers to be built for their capacity, Nutrace went out and said we will do a small kilowatt demonstration of the technology itself. Even before that, they said we will just 3D print this particular electrolyzer that we have, and we will show that it works at a very, very small level. Right? What investors want to know is that you are capable of building the technology that you claim is highly differentiated and is impactful, and show it at a small level so that it gives the other party confidence that you can actually go out and invest. The way that one way to do that is to either you bootstrap or you work with government grants or some angel funding to build a small prototype and show that this is actually possible. The other aspect I think that's extremely important, and I'm sure most entrepreneurs in this room will also agree, is that a balanced co-founding team is extremely important. Why is this the case? Because it brings in different perspectives, different skill sets, and different pieces of expertise that can essentially be leveraged while building out the startup. It's also an expectation that most co-founders, if not all of them, are fully committed to the company. What that means is that they are full-time, right? And you are not doing this between your main or your other job as such. Commitment is important because investors come in as early partners, and hence we would want to be engaged with people who are devoting all their time, energy, and attention to this particular effort alone. And the simple reason being entrepreneurship is extremely hard. Deep tech entrepreneurship is even more harder. And hence, it's very difficult for us to underwrite that particular company at that particular stage if the team is not fully committed to it. It is helpful if you can have early conversations with advisors who can essentially guide you. You don't have to. But was there a question?
All are requested to please.
Okay, I'll just maybe go ahead. There's a little bit of an echo. Okay.
Please go ahead,
So,
is there anything on? Yeah, now it is closed.
Yeah, I think this is good. Okay. So initial conversations with advisors who can guide you, it's fine if you don't onboard them full time or onboard them officially, but it's important to have some consequential people guiding you on what is being done. Having a clean cap table is important. Now, this may not necessarily be in line with how a lot of companies are being set up at this point of time. But what happens is that we've seen this very often, that a significant amount of equity is given to non-operational or non-functional individual stakeholders. Now, these may be in the form of advisors or family members or initial supportive people that are there. They might have helped you put the company together, helped you with some initial access. They might have helped you with a certain amount of, they might have given you a space to, put up your company, put up an office space or something along those lines. But putting them on the cap table with significant amount of equity is not the best possible approach when you are raising capital from VCs. Now, I'll elaborate on this a little bit because I think this is important, because we've seen a fair bit of this happen in the ecosystem these days. What happens is that equity is permanent, right? Like you give equity, it's unlike capital, right? Equity is there. If you give someone 5% of your company, that person is expected to be a shareholder in the company for as long as the company exists, unless you find a way to buy them back or make them give up their equity, right? But it's a commitment for a very long period of time. What we've seen is that the reason why I put non-operational or non-functional members is that after in a lot of these cases, after a certain point of time for these individuals, they lose the relevance is lost, right? Yes, they might have helped you maybe set up an office or given you some guidance at the early stage, or they may mentor you. But beyond a certain point of time, that individual may not necessarily be bringing in most value to the company, a value that is equivalent to the equity that they hold, right? So we've seen in a lot of cases that early advisors or maybe someone who gives an angel check, they end up getting 15-20%. They end up getting about 15-20% equity in the company, which becomes very difficult because when an investor comes in, we see that a significant chunk of the company is sitting with someone who is not necessarily adding value on a day-to-day basis. When that equity can be used to bring in someone who can actually bring in a significant amount of value, maybe another co-founder, maybe a very senior hire in the company, or maybe another investor who will bring a lot of market access or value or so on and so forth. Right? So it may not necessarily be the best way to use up that equity. The last 2 points are which is something that I would recommend very strongly. It's important to understand your investors, right? As in what matters to them. So do your own understanding, activity of understanding. Watch videos of how startup pitches are done on YouTube. There are a lot of them. Y Combinator puts up a fair bit of them. But even otherwise, there are a lot of events where startups do pitches. Try to see what works, what does not work. How does that sound to you? And see if there is something that you can pick up that can be changed in the way that you, right? Likewise, listen to videos and podcasts of investors and GPs, right? Like for example, take for us at Special. We have a fair bit of podcasts and videos where Vishesh and Arjun, who are the managing partners at the firm, have spoken about what we as an organization like, what is our outlook, so on and so forth, and then see if that is something that is the DNA of a firm that you want to be associated with. right? Do you or is it the sort of sectors? I mean, is a sector that you are building in? Is it an area of interest for that particular firm? So and so forth. So on the investor fund, I think again it's an extension of the previous point that I just made, which is figuring out who are the right investors for you. It involves a certain amount of homework where you actually go through the websites or listen to the podcasts, or see what kind of potential investments that they have done, and draw a pattern to say, okay, hey, this is a person, this is an investor, this is an investment firm that has shown in the past that they are inclined to invest in deep science and deep tech and at the early stage. And you will see one or two examples of similar investments in their portfolio. That makes it a lot more likelier that they will be interested in what you are building, as against someone who does not invest heavily into deep tech. That does not mean that someone who's not invested in deep tech will not invest in deep tech now, right? Historically not invested does not necessarily mean that they will not invest in the future as well. But it helps you make a priority list to say who are the ones that you would essentially want to focus on. And then finding the right POCs in the firm is also something that I would advise. For example, I predominantly spend time on the hardware side of our deep tech investments and not necessarily on the software side. So if you would come to me with an investment with an idea that's essentially heavily software focused, I would reroute this to one of my colleagues, and my colleague will have to pick it up from there. Right? That's just one more step that is being added, one more layer of friction that is being essentially added in the process. Right. So in order to avoid that, you can go through the LinkedIn profiles of the people, of the investors, of the investment team, and figure out who invests in or who predominantly talks about what. Right. Like if I'm continuously sharing articles or news clippings or podcasts and videos of a particular sector, then it's very likely that I may be the one in the organization who looks at that particular sector. Right. The last point is finding an evangelist or an advisor or any person who can make a warm introduction to you to that particular VC firm. Let's say, rather than doing that cold email of sorts, you should definitely do cold emails. But what definitely works and catches the attention of an investor, of a VC, is that you find someone who can vouch for you and make an introduction to that firm. Right. So for example, if you don't directly know someone at Special or the partners at Special, but you know someone who is close to you who also knows the partners at Special, then you can request this particular person to make an introduction to make an introduction for you to the firm, so that the firm takes it a lot more seriously, a lot more, gives it a lot more attention, so on and so forth. Does this mean that we do not necessarily look at things that don't come from warm introductions? The answer is no. We do keep our eyes and ears open, and we try to get back to every opportunity, every email, every LinkedIn that comes up. But beyond that, it helps if that warm introduction comes in, because it accelerates some of these processes. So now quickly some views on the pitch deck. Right. These are some suggestions that I usually give, but do keep in mind that these may not necessarily be the most easiest of things for an entrepreneur to do. But it's always good to keep this in the back of your mind while working on your pitch deck. I usually suggest that you have a large dump of about 50 plus slides to choose from. Right? Because every investor is essentially different. And that's the fundamental thing that as an entrepreneur, as a deep tech entrepreneur raising capital, that I would suggest that you realize. Why is this the case is essentially that, like I said earlier, different people have different risk appetites. They may or may not understand that particular sector that you are building in, which means that you may have to give them more context and educate them a little bit more on certain aspects. For example, maybe an investor who is an EV, let's say a fund that invests heavily into EV and mobility. You don't necessarily have to explain if you are building let's say a battery pack company or a battery thermal management, right? Now, you don't have to necessarily give them a lot of context on what is happening in the battery space or the EV space. Like the problem statement needn't be 2-3 slides, right? You can quickly come to what is it that you are building. So you have to fine tune your deck a little bit based on which investor that you're speaking. I would say broadly 70% of your deck will remain the same, but maybe for that 30%, you need to kind of figure out where should the emphasis be for that particular investor. Now, I would also suggest that you have a different version to send via email or via WhatsApp, and a different one that you actually present when you do a video call or you do an in-person. Now, again, why is this the case? Because there are two different schools of thought here. Whichever works for you, I think you should pick it up. Some suggest that the email, the one that you send on email, should be very short and crisp, and the one that you present can be elaborate and long. The other school of thought is vice versa. The one that you send on email has to be the longer one because people can take their own sweet time and read how much ever they want. And the one that you present on video should be the shorter one because then you can get into questions very quickly, right? So I don't think there's a right answer. Personally, I prefer the email WhatsApp one to be the shorter one, and the longer one being the one that you present in front directly, because you can control the narrative, you can control the pace however you want. And hence you can keep it a 50 slide deck and go through it in 20 minutes. But if you send a 50 slide deck on email, then investors might not necessarily be, they may not have the time energy to go through 50 slides, right? Because they don't know what to hear from. I would also suggest that you have multiple versions of the same slide, depending on who the investor is, right? Like a problem statement slide can be a very high level problem statement slide. There can be a very nuanced problem statement slide. Like someone who knows, let's say, EVs and mobility can have that nuanced slide. But a general investor, you may have to give them the very high level picture first and then come to them. And the last point I think is that you got to figure out as you get the pulse of the conversation and figure out if the investors are preferring on call or they're preferring in person and plan it accordingly. Very quickly, what I know I think we are close to 30 minutes into the conversation, but I'll try to wrap this up as quickly as possible. What goes into a pitch deck? Essentially highlighting on the founding team. If you have a very if you have high relevant industry experience, academic experience, which is relevant to that particular sector or space that you are investing in or that you're building in, then highlight that at the very beginning, right? Tell us why you are the best people to build this particular technology. Don't wait till the very end to bring up the team slide, because then by the time you get there, you may or may not have lost the investor, right? As in their attention they may not have been sufficiently excited. But if you tell me in the very beginning that, hey, we are the best people to do this because I come from this particular background, this is where I have worked, I have spent 20 years doing this, then as an investor, you are drawing my attention to spend time, right? To focus on it, right? Customer interactions, right? Like I absolutely love entrepreneurs who speak to as many customers as possible, right? And I want to caveat this, and I want to bring out a nuance here. This is not that you're selling to your customers, right? You will not have a product yet, right? When you're doing your first fundraise, you may not have a product yet. You are selling. You don't have to sell your product to your customer, but you essentially have to figure out if this is something that they would want in the first place, right? Is there a problem that they are facing? Is there what specific problems are they going through, and where? And this correlates to the third point as well. What is the unique insight that you're picking up? VCs love investors who understand problem statements really well, right? And this is because if you know problem statements very well, it usually coming from, because you've spent a fair bit of time in the ecosystem, you've spoken to a lot of stakeholders, you've spoken to customers, you've spoken to partners, industry partners, big companies, other entrepreneurs, and so on. You know what is exactly wrong, right? And thereby you are able to build solutions, you're able to solve for problems that come along the way. if you go for a very specific, very nuanced problem without significant depth, then it becomes very difficult for the investor to really trust you that you will be able to solve it, because you don't understand the rest of the value chain then. On competition, I've usually seen founders do a couple of things. One, they say we don't have any competition, right? That I think is not the right way to position your story. But the other thing that I've seen is that that founders usually talk about other companies building in the similar space as the competition, and they label that as the competition. Let me give you an example, right? So let's say, for example, if you're building in the EV space, right? Like if you're Ather today, your competition is not just Ola, or it's not just another EV two-wheeler OEM company, but it's also the IC engine company, the IC engine two-wheeler company, right? Because those are also people who are targeting the same audience as you are, right? They are selling their products to the same audience as you are. So in essence, they are your competition. They may not be your direct competition. They may not use the same tech stack as what you're using, but at the end of the day, they are solving for the customer's pain point, which is to move from one place to another in the most economical way as possible, right? And hence, having a broader understanding of what competition looks like, I think, is an extremely important thing. And not just say that Ather's competition is Ola, but Ather's competition is beyond just another two-wheeler OEM, EV two-wheeler OEM and such. Differentiation, why is this approach better than the rest? We've talked about this earlier. Defensibility, IP, and differentiation becomes extremely important. Some points are re-emphasized here. Founding team, again, why are you the best qualified people to solve this problem? Highlight your technical skill sets, past experience, because this is so hard, right? Like what you're building in deep tech is sometimes so differentiated, so nuanced. If we get confidence that you guys are the best folks to do it, then it increases our interest significantly. The second point is a little contentious, right? In the sense that investors understand that you come from strong technical backgrounds sometimes, and hence you want to use certain types of language and jargons and certain terms. But very often it becomes very difficult for the investor to catch up and to understand what you're saying, because fundamentally investors are not subject matter experts, right? So they come from, maybe they come from a science background, they may not. Even if they come from a science background, they have not spent as much time as you have on that particular problem statement or that particular sector, right? And their investors are not your customers, right? So if you go very deep into the technology or the specifications and so on and so forth, they may not necessarily understand what you are essentially saying, right? And hence it becomes important to use language that is a lot more understandable, use analogies, use anecdotes and stories to make it a lot more easier. Articulating the gap, I think, is extremely important. While there are problems, and there have been problems, and there will continue to be problems in the world and in the ecosystem, they are very often they're not somehow being addressed today, right? What you are proposing as an entrepreneur is that the current solutions suck, and I have a better way to solve this problem, right? It will be very useful if you tell us what is that gap, right? Why is it that current solutions are really bad, right? And then talk about what is it that you have figured out, what is your unique insight that will bring differentiation, that will help you do this much better than the others. Tell us what you have done so far, show us the progress, and tell us why is it a meaningful progress that you have made without necessarily raising capital, right? Like you've just taken grants or you've just taken angel money, but you've built something, right? And tell us what is it that you've built and why is this significant, right? What does this prove? Whatever you've built, what does it prove? And thereby that we can take confidence and invest in you so that you can go on to build something more meaningful going forward, right? Market sizing, we've seen a lot of entrepreneurs put up, screenshots and graphs from just from reports, right? A lot of reports are being published. While that's okay, it'll be great if you can do a ground up market sizing. What does that mean? For example, if you're building let's say, for example, motors, right? If you're building motors for EVs in India, right? Now, rather than putting up a graph from a certain report that says the EV motor market is expected to grow by, let's say, 9% year on year until 2030, and there is a bar graph that is essentially put, and that market is valued at, let's say, $5 billion. Instead of saying that, let's say if you can look at the base projections of the number of EVs that are to be made, right? For example, let's say between now and 2030, there are 10 million EVs that will be made in India, that will be sold in India, right? Now, 10 million EVs essentially means that there will be 10 million motors that will be sold, right? Let's make that equivalence. One EV equals one motor, and the motor is, let's say, 10% of the cost of the EV. Then the number of motors is essentially going to be 1/10 that of the the cost of the motor is essentially going to be 1/10 of the cost of the EV. The market size of the motor is essentially going to be 1/10 the market size of that of the EV. Right. So if you can help us break that down and show that you've done a ground up market sizing, I think that's a great way to do it. What is important is that you show a large TAM, which convinces investors that this is actually an opportunity worth pursuing. Sometimes what happens, that opportunity is just not large enough. Maybe it's a $50 million opportunity. Maybe it's just a $100 million opportunity. The TAM itself for that product is going to be less than $100 million. Now, that may not be a large opportunity. Yes, one may actually think that this is 800 crores that is to be made. Why is this not something that investors find it attractive? There's 800 crores of money to be made. But the way to kind of approach this is to look at it from the investor's perspective. What it means is that if the total market is in itself is about 100 crores in size, 800 crores in size, how big can this company get? If the market itself is 800 crores, the company cannot become bigger than the market, right? So let's say there is no opportunity for a $1 billion outcome from this company at all, right? The company cannot be valued $1 billion because the market itself is $100 million. And if it may not be valued at such high levels, then how will the VC essentially make? Right? So large opportunities, large market sizes become extremely important for VCs to consider that it's a significant opportunity to be worth betting. Of course, there are nuances to all this. There are exceptions that can be made, but in general, this is the way that an investor would approach this. I think the last one is extremely important. If you're building something in the hardware or even in software, show us what you've built, right? Like as against using animations or renders, even if you've done 3D printing of something, show us, put pictures of that, right? If you've built a robot, or if you built a tracking robot or an autonomous mobile robot, AMR, show us a demo of it working, right? Like if you've done that, then please show that this actually works, right? I'll quickly cover, I think I have 2-3 more slides, and then we'll open up for questions, of course. But I think a data room is something that all founders at all stages should focus on. These are essentially, think of it as a Google Drive folder or a OneDrive folder, where you have different documentation that is put in one place as a repository of sorts. These are documents that talk more in depth about what you are essentially building, right? A pitch deck or one slide on a pitch deck may not be sufficient to talk about your technical IP or the competitive landscape, so on and so forth. You may sometimes want to elaborate on all of these things, right? Your tech IP is something that you would really know in and out, and somewhere it is important to document this. This can cover, of course, some patents, your competitive landscape, what conversations you've had with your customers, what have you learned from them, how have you connected the dots by doing these conversations. Talking about your founder, as your co-founders, you talk about your backgrounds a little bit more in detail. If you've done any market sizing exercises, and there's an Excel sheet there, your cap table, your financial model, any legal documents, company incorporation certificates, so on and so forth. All these, keep it in one single repository of sorts. But it's not necessary that you have to share all of these to the investor on day 0, day 1, when you do the first call, right? Give it to them only when the investor comes back and asks you, hey, I'd like to understand your competitive landscape better. at that point of time, you can share this particular document or a part of this document. You can cut and paste some stuff and then share it across. Right? You don't have to share all documents at the very beginning, or you don't have to share every document at the very beginning. You can just share what is being requested. The last point, I think, is also an important thing we've seen as a good practice, which is to have an FAQ document, which is frequently asked questions. Over the course of you preparing for a fundraise, you would have realized that these are the common questions that everyone asks about your particular technology or your company or the product that you're building. Note down all these questions and answer these questions, right? Like have a half a pager or a one pager, have a Word document where you're noting down each of these questions and answering these questions, so that if an investor comes and asks you, a particular question, you already have that answer typed out and written out, and you can just copy and paste and send this to them. Or you can say, these are the common questions that people have asked us over the course of the fundraise. Why don't you just go through it? It should hopefully answer most questions that you would have, right? Last point is engaging with investors during and outside the fundraise, right? So during the fundraise, my view of this is that the fundraise, as a CEO, you should always be in the mode where you're trying to raise capital, or you're trying to convince people to put money in your company, either in this round or in the subsequent round, which means that engaging with investors is not a one-time activity, or rather it's something that you do only for a few months of the year, right? There is something that you have to do very focused while you raise that particular round, but there are a bunch of things that are to be done, in my view, beyond that fundraising period itself, right? So during the fundraise, very important, we've seen a lot of examples of this happen. Replying quickly, promptly to investors, I think, is extremely important. The third point is a little, I know my startups may not necessarily like it, but the first 2 points I think are extremely important. Always try to return or reply to emails, and make it at least acknowledge them and say that you will get back to the questions in 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever it is. Don't leave the email unattended, unanswered, right? Always, the ball should always be in the other person's court, right? That's the way to think about it. And having your FAQ document, having your data room ready before you go out to fundraise will actually help you answer questions promptly, get back to people promptly. One investment banking firm that I spoke to recently essentially said they train their investors, they train their startups, the startups that they work with, to prepare all this documentation so clearly that within 6 hours of the email coming from the investor, they're able to give all pieces of information, right? While I think 6 hours is a little too ambitious, I think within 24 to 48 hours, you should be able to turn around with the information that is needed, right? Which means that you have to be prepared so effectively before actually going out to fundraise, right? Invite people to come to visit your facility. I think seeing is believing. Seeing is great. They get a lot of confidence when investors see what you're actually building in person, right? The third point is that investors will take a lot of time to get back, very often than not, hence requesting patience. I can sit on my side and tell you why that is happening, but I think the essence is that sometimes we also have to learn. It's not nearly as straightforward as it is for founders to know about that subject matter as it is for us, and hence it takes a lot of time for us to get back. So hence requesting some patience there. Quickly decide whether it's important to spend time or not with that particular investor, depending on the kind of interest that they are showing, right? And hence shortlist 4 to 5 investors who are most likely to invest in this particular round, and actively pursue them, give them whatever is needed, invite them to their facility, keep asking them, what is needed more, so that more and more of their team members can get involved, and they can build conviction on what you're building. Beyond the fundraise, I think it is a good practice. Let's say you spoke to 50 VCs in your first round, 2 of them committed for your round, the 48 of them have said no for a particular reason. It is good to keep them updated on what you're doing, right? Which means that you either send a newsletter or you send an email update, once in a quarter, just telling them, hey, this is what I've been doing over the past 3 months. This is what I expect, and this is why I'm super excited about what we're building. This is what I'm expecting to do in the next 3 months, right? So it keeps them informed of what you are doing, so that in a subsequent round, they are a lot more prepared when you go and ask them for capital, because they would have been updated of what have you done over that time period. Again, inviting them to visit your facility, I think is a very good activity to do, irrespective of whether you're part of a fundraise or not. Newsletters or updates, 1 in 3 are repetitive, and maintain cordial relations, right? Like I personally, I know my colleagues also do this. I know a lot of my colleagues in the ecosystem and other VC firms also do this. We have good cordial relations with a lot of founders, right? Which essentially means that if we come across a certain grant, or if some investor says this is a sector that we are looking at, can you suggest a few startups here? Then we would be more than happy to put your name across and connect them to you, so on and so forth, right? So we are also trying to see, the deep tech ecosystem is so nascent in India today that we are also trying to see how best we can add value, even if it is not in our portfolio. We're trying to see how best we can be of support for the ecosystem. Yeah, that's largely what I had. My apologies, there's an abrupt ending, but I just wanted to kind of talk about some of these points, and I'm happy to take any specific questions. I know we have about 10 minutes or so. Yeah, that's largely what I had.
Thank you, Sunilji. Thank you very much. I think we can open the session for the discussion. If anyone is having question, can raise hand. And some of the questions are also there in chat box for you.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Adarsh here. So
Yeah, please.
my question is, if there is a granted IP, I mean, my device has an utility patent. So how would you define competition in that space? I mean, if it is a novel thing, and of course, how would you define a competition, and how would you put forth to the VC?
Yeah, so the way that I would think of competition in such a case is that, yes, it is a novel product, but it is perhaps solving a problem that is being addressed by different ways, right? Now, let's say you have, let me take an example, right? Let's say you're addressing diabetes. Now, diabetes can be addressed through, let's say, a certain type of a medical device, a certain type of a drug that can be injected into, that can be given to you. There may be, let's say, a certain weight loss regimens that are given. There are a lot of these activities that are done to reverse diabetes, so on and so forth, right? Now, the market that you're targeting is that, right? Now, there are different ways of addressing the same problem, right? Now, some people might be addressing it in the same way that you are, while your particular product might be different. There may be 5 other products which are probably addressing, it's also a medical device addressing diabetes, right? But they may use a different technology stack. But they're all targeting the same customer at the end of the day. There are X number of people with diabetes and growing. You are also targeting the same X number of people. They are also targeting the same X number of people, right? Your product is unique and has an IP. I think that's wonderful. But at the hands from the customer perspective, they are looking at 5 different options that are available. So that becomes a certain type of direct competition. The indirect competition is other things that are also looking to solve diabetes, but not necessarily a medical device. It might be a drug or a therapeutic.
Meeting. मतलब वो program
Hello.
जैसे होता है.
I request all of you to keep your mics off.
उधर कौन सी मीटिंग कर रहा था
Ramanand Prajapati, can you mute it, please? Yeah, please. Thank you.
Guys, please, we request you to please keep your mics off and let the speaker, and anybody who has a question can only turn on their mics. Otherwise, please, we restrict you. Please keep the decorum of this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hi. One question from here that I wanted to know was, typically, how long to wait for an investor to revert?
Yeah, good question. Answer is there's no right answer. It depends. But typically, I would say your end-to-end fundraising process should not be more than 3 months, right? Between your first set of conversations to your getting a term sheet, I think if within a 3-month period it's becoming extremely difficult for you to raise capital, I think you should reevaluate. What I mean by reevaluate is that you need to go back and see analyze why are investors saying no. Is it because the product is not they're waiting for some more validation to come on the product and they're saying, okay, let me wait it out, or they're saying, okay, maybe the market is not deep enough, or whatever reason investors are essentially not perhaps committing to investing in the company. Important to retrospect at that point of time, right? But at the same time, I'll break that down. End to end is perhaps 3 months. Sorry, I think you wanted to say something. All right.
Yep. So end to end is perhaps 3 months is what I'll take it as a ballpark, right? And second thing that I wanted to know was typically what should be the minimum equity that the co-founders should have before they go into a Series A funding.
Again, very difficult to answer because that depends on what is the dilution that you would have done in the previous round. I'll tell you what we have seen typically. Right? A very good cap table in our view is, let's say there are 3 co-founders. I'm not saying there should only be 3. Sometimes it can be 2. Right? Let's say whatever the number of co-founders is, there is equal equity split between the co-founders. Right? 33, 33, 33 if there are 3 co-founders, and 50, 50 if there are 2 co-founders. What that signals is that all co-founders are equal and they will be pulling their own weight in contributing to that particular startup, and they're all important and they'll all take responsibilities, leadership, and lead the company and take it forward. And let's say an investor comes in for your pre-seed round or your seed round. In India, in deep tech, we have seen the first round of dilution is usually anywhere between 20 to 30%. Right? That's the first round of dilution, right? And that 20 to 30% gets distributed between the investors who come and participate in that particular. There may be a lead investor who will take, let's say, 15% of the round. There may be other investors, smaller investors who will take, let's say, 10 more percent. So it's a 25% of dilution that essentially happens, right? So that essentially means everyone's diluted. So then the cap table becomes 3 founders holding 75%, a set of investors holding 25%. Then that will be your cap table when you go on to raise your, let's say, your Series A round as such.
I see. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Divya this side. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, firstly. I might have missed few things, but I have a question around the valuation for the seed stage. How we come up with the number on the valuation in a manner that we'll be able to defend it.
Honestly, again, there's no calculation here. Our experience is that the India deep tech ecosystem is very nascent, and very honestly, at the pre-seed seed stage, there are no clear methodologies to define the valuation of a company. And it's because we don't have any Excel sheets, we don't have revenue data, we don't have any sort of track record of the company. We are taking a bet on the founder's vision. We are taking a bet on what has been demonstrated so far, and we're taking a bet on the capabilities of the founder itself. So it is largely subjective. It is largely it's more art than science, I would say. But again, the thumb rule that you should think of is, like I said for the previous question, that let's say there is 25% dilution that is happening, and let's say you are raising a $1 million round, that essentially means that your post-money valuation is going to be $4 million. That's a general thumb rule to think of, right? But then you might have done something significantly more that deserves a larger valuation, and then it becomes a negotiation. You may say that, I have done so many things, but I want only $1 million, but I've done so many things and they are of significant value, and hence can we have a higher valuation? Then you say, maybe I want a $5 million valuation, right? And then the dilution becomes 20%, right? So you have 1 out of 5 million. It's a $1 million round at a $5 million valuation, which means you're diluting only 20% of the company. There's no direct answer here, but this is a good thumb rule to think of it. Round size and dilution leading to.
Yeah, I got that. It's a little bit subjective, but it's still like how the financial projections and other data points can help us
I would
with
think
the
very
product.
little, to be honest. I would think very little because again, like I said it a little at the beginning of the presentation. If this was more talking about pre-product, pre-revenue companies. At the time that a pre-seed investor comes in, we are talking about a stage where you don't have a product and you're definitely not making money. So projections are based on
Just
certain assumptions, and they're based on certain assumptions that you look at. An investor might counter that and say, hey, I don't believe this is the assumption, this is the right assumption, and hence if I tweak some
okay.
of those assumptions, the numbers might change, right?
Okay,
Projections are
let me
great,
just
but at this
let me just
particular
narrow.
stage it might be a little difficult.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but let me just give narrow down this case. In our case, is look, we have the product ready. We have few successful pilots with some large enterprises, and we are in a stage that we'll be getting some revenue, the committed revenue from these enterprises. Then how should I pitch my valuation and distance?
Again, there's no right answer. I think it boils down to at that point of time with that particular investor, it boils down to a negotiation. What we've seen is that at the early stage, and my request and my suggestion at this point is that you keep the valuation as second priority, right? It's important to prioritize investors who can bring value to your company, not just today, but in the long run as well. Valuation is something that is definitely something that you can pick up as you do your larger rounds, as you do your series A, series B, so on and so forth. If let's say, for example, you work with that, you focus and get the right investors in this particular round, and with that capital that comes in, you are able to do these pilots, get customers, and make revenues. Then you make a significantly strong case for a very good series A or a pre-series A round, where your valuation can be significantly higher because now you have actual revenues to show, right? So, but it's important to get that initial right investors who will actually support you in this particular journey, because in deep science and deep tech, things may take a long time. The chances of failure is higher. You need investors who will be patient and give you that opportunity to experiment and scale at the pace that it is. Right. So that is my suggestion at this point of time.
Yeah,
Hi
thank you.
Sunil,
Sorry.
Karan here
I think
from
we'll take a different question
Miss
if that's okay.
Miss Sneha,
yeah.
Sneha
Hi,
can
Sunil.
go. Yeah.
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 Hi, Sunil. Sneha here from Sarka Tech. First of all, thank you very
Nice.
much for a very insightful session regarding fundraising. In my case, particularly, we are an OPC, wherein I hold 100% of the shares. I am the CEO and founder of the company. We have a patent and we also have had pilot trials with regard to the software that we have been developing. In this case, what are our chances of raising funds and how do you advise us?
A little tricky, to be honest, because I'll tell you the general approach to VC, and this is not a blanket answer, so please forgive me for that. There are a lot of nuances to this, but in general, VCs think a lot about before investing in an OPC, which is a one-person company, right? And the view there is just that it's just too much risk on one particular person, right? And what happens if, let's say, for example, you fall sick, touch wood, right? Like, and let's say you have to be under medical attention for, let's say, a couple of months, right? Like, what happens to that company? Because the employees have to be paid, customers have to be catered to, but the leadership becomes a little, it becomes a little difficult to figure out who is doing what and how will the company run, so on and so forth. Which is why VCs always prefer that there are co-founders, right? That there is a second co-founder who is there, who is able to run the company in the absence, or even if the first co-founder is, let's say, traveling abroad or meeting customers, there's someone else who can actually steady the ship and take it forward, right? So that's essentially my answer to this. There are nuances, of course, that we can talk about it separately maybe, but this is generally how VCs tend to look at single person companies or one person companies. That's essentially my answer. I know it may not be the one that you would want to hear, but unfortunately, I think this is largely how it is looked at.
So I was expecting this answer, but on the other hand, usually I mean, what I feel is some people just for the sake of having co-founders end up, bringing wrong people inside. So that may also actually, affect the company and its growth also. So when we are dealing with such cases, when there is a very good founder, but there are another case wherein there are two co-founders, wherein one is good, the other one is not so good. I mean, usually, many a times I have seen companies.
I hear you. I hear you. I think
Yeah.
a wrong co-founder, having a co-founder who is not the right fit for the company is extremely detrimental for the company. If that is the case, then again we will try to see if we can identify such red flags of sorts at the very beginning, and very unlikely that it will proceed into an investment if we don't see that founder adding value or being detrimental to the company. Yes, compared to that, a single founder is much better. Single founder who performs, who adds value is much better. But the risks that I outlined for a single founder still stays. Right? Yes, compared to the second case that you mentioned, this sounds better. But the first case also has its own risks.
True.
So yeah.
And continuation of what you told with regard to the first case. Suppose the main point of contact, the main founder who has all the stakes is for some reason, for medical reasons or something, he or she is not being in a position to monitor different things happening in the company. In that case, I mean, can they have another person appointed in their presence to act in charge while they are?
Yes, I think
No, I'm
Sneha,
just.
I think these nuances are definitely something that can be worked out. I know there are always answers to questions. I mean,
Okay.
there are always possible solutions to certain
Okay.
problems or things that we might have. Which is why I said that this is a blanket. I mean, there's like a very generic answer that I'm giving. There are always nuances that can be discussed. If that's okay, we can possibly take this offline. I think you have something in mind, which is why you want to get an answer for that.
Okay.
Maybe we should take this
Surely, we can
offline.
connect, Sunil. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sunil. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
Sanjeev ji. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Karanji, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Sunil. Pleasure connecting back with
Hi,
you
Karan.
again after a long time.
Pleasure to listen to you again.
I have two connected questions. One is that being a deep tech startup, should revenue focus be there early on? Second is, let's say there is a technology that we are building and there are byproducts that can be commercialized soon that can bring up a good chunk of revenue for us. So does it give a green flag or a good indication to the investor?
Yeah. Good questions. Should revenue be the focus? I think it depends on the complexity of the technology. Let's say, for example, I'll can maybe give an example here and say, in let's say something like Agnikul, which we invested in, which is a rocket launch company, as in it's a company that builds rockets to take satellites to space. There was no way that you could do revenue uh, until you have a rocket, right? At least it was very difficult to monetize anything else, right? And hence it was important to kind of build that rocket as quickly as possible and raise capital for that. But we kind of did de-risk the company at different stages and got it there. So, but if it's something that is where the tech is not supremely complex, or that it can be built in a shorter period of time, then getting to revenue might not necessarily be required for you to raise the first round of capital, but maybe for the second round it becomes the way that the rule of thumb that we have is to say in India you can raise two rounds of capital possibly based on vision, right? And not more than that, right? The third round, you definitely should have revenues. It's very difficult without revenues, right? Two rounds, you can probably do it. There are, of course, exceptional cases like Agnikul, which is space tech and takes 7-8 years. But in general, I would say for most purposes, it's good to consider that the second round you can perhaps get away without revenues, but it's good to have revenues. Third round, absolutely, you should focus on having revenues. To your second question on byproducts, I think it's a good strategy as long as it does not distract you, right? Like it's a part of your product development process. It's an intermediate step in your product development process, and then you can have two people working on that particular finding customers for that, so on and so forth. But if the end goal is you're getting distracted from the end goal, and timelines are getting delayed because the money is there. The money is in the final product that you do, right? The value is there. The intermediate things are great for keeping the lights on in the company, but otherwise they should not become the sole focus of the company as such. As long as you are able to balance that, I think it's not a bad idea to monetize some of the byproducts that you get.
Great, great. Just to
Um,
get a
yeah.
counter on this, how do we represent or how do we gain the confidence of the investor that yes, I am taking some revenues, I've built a byproduct and it is giving me commercial success, but I'm still focused on the end goal? Because once the investor sees this, they become a little
Yeah,
dicey
so the
that
pitch is
the
always on the
focus
end
will.
goal. So the
Hmm.
pitch, I think that then it's a storytelling thing, right? Like the pitch, the focus is always the pitch is always on the end goal. You then kind of say, while it will take 3 years for us to get there, I have two other options that I can do in the intermediate. This is not a distraction from reaching the end goal. I would have done this even if not for monetizing it, right? I am just being savvy enough and monetizing it, right? I have two people on my team whom I've brought in to just figure out the monetization strategy for us.
Got it.
And maybe at a deeper stage of conversation, you can say that, hey, if this is not working out, I will kill that project. As in kill that project, matlab, I will not focus on monetization, right? I will
Got
I will I will refocus. I will try this for 3 months. If it doesn't work, or I'll try this for 6 months. If it doesn't work, and if I feel that it is draining too many resources, time, and money of the company, then I will kill it, right? So that shows that you are willing to risk it and give it a shot, but it also shows that you are bold enough to say that, hey, I don't I can cut my losses at this point of time and move on.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Is there any
Great.
other question? Please
There
put
are a
your hand.
bunch of questions on the chat box, so maybe
Yeah.
I'll just Dr. Sanjeev, do we have some time?
Yeah, we can do. No problem. 10
Okay,
minutes.
I will maybe in about 5 minutes. I'll just quickly,
Sure, sure.
maybe in a
Yeah.
rapid fire manner, I'll just try to answer some of these questions.
Sure, sure.
Swapnil asks, what should be the co-founder team size? Is it necessary to have two or more people as co-founders? Good to have two at the bare minimum. More than four is not advisable, I would say, because it becomes too many cooks spoil the broth kind of a situation. Between two to four, ideally two or three, right? That's the way that I would put it. And important to have balance as well. Having two very technical founders may not necessarily be supremely helpful. Having one supremely technical founder, the other who has techno business angle might be a lot more valuable. Typically, what should be okay? Harit asks, what should be the minimum equity with the co-founders? I think we answered this question. Then Adarsh asks if there is a granted IP, which means it's novel. How do you? I think we answered Adar's
Yes.
question as well.
Yes.
Typically, how long to wait for an investor to revert? Harit asked this question. I was trying to answer that. I think the end to end is about 3 months, but I would say once you make the first pitch, the way, okay, good practice is once you do the first pitch, touch base with the investor maybe within 24 to 48 hours and say, hey, we spoke 2 days ago. Is there something that you want help with? Is there some other information that I can give you to help you think through this better? I'm open to doing this. Please let me know, right? And hopefully the investor gets back and says, this is where I need conviction. Or let's say you can also say, hey, if you have any particular questions, you can send them to me via WhatsApp or via email. I will try to get back to you as quickly as possible. What I'm trying to indicate here is that rather than waiting for the investor to get back, I would request you to kind of push from your end as well, right? Because at the end of the day, you need the money, you have to raise capital, and I would suggest that you push investors whom you think are interesting, whom you think can bring value. Take the lead and push, right? I know as I'm saying this, I know I'm sounding as if that investors will not get back to you as such, but I'm only suggesting that because I'm only requesting if you can take the lead only in certain cases where you think that the investor might add value and will be useful, so on and so forth. But typically, if you don't get a reply in a week to 10 days, I would suggest you follow up once more, get a view, And if you don't hear back, then it's probably an indicator that the investor is not supremely excited. Right? You can keep touching base, but see how the investor is also responding, and then take. Someone has asked, Sid has asked, are there verticals within deep tech that Speciale focuses on? Yes, we predominantly do space tech, climate, industry, and manufacturing, which includes semicon, robotics, quantum. We look at AI software, AI SaaS. We also look at life sciences and biotech.
Got it. Thank you.
I got fund through EIR fellowship. No, I don't. That's as OPCs were answered. Rajesh asks, will the investors be interested in accepting proposals and projects that are more oriented towards fundamental science rather than product-driven ideas, and support young scientists to scale up the findings into products? A tough question to answer without knowing the details, but let me kind of give an overview. Investors don't necessarily take science risks, right? Let me put it that way. What that essentially means is that if it's a completely new science that you're trying to figure out, with there being no precedence of this science having worked out in the past, then it is a little difficult for an investor to come in. Again, very specifically talking about Indian investors doing deep science and deep tech in India, right? The West has shown a little more, risk appetite to do something like this. But in India, at this point of time, I would say fundamental science risk is difficult for investors, venture capitalists to take. That part is usually done through PhD programs and grants and supported by academic organizations, and less by private capital coming in. Right? This is again 99% of the cases. There may be the lone exceptions here and there, but in general, fundamental science risks are something that investors might not take. What they will take is, if the science is proven, then engineering risks can be underwritten, right? Let's say the science has been figured out, but the science has to be manifested into a product, has to be engineered into a particular product. That risk, in Indian investors have shown the appetite, but fundamental science risk, at this point, very difficult, right? Can you give an example of most compelling reason for your last recent investment? Okay, our most recent investment was an investment in a nuclear fusion company. So compelling reason is that this is just fusion is the holy grail of energy production. It's limitless energy is the way that we would put it. And if you have limitless energy, you can solve for most problems, including societal problems, poverty, inequality, all those things, if it's with sufficient energy, can get solved for. I'm not even talking about the climate aspect of it, but beyond climate itself, there are a lot more possibilities. For us, the other angle was that fusion as an energy source has not really been significantly explored in India so far. Fission, we've been running nuclear reactors for a very long period of time, but fusion we've not done as much. And someone wanting to do private fusion, fusion on the private side was very exciting for us. So we wanted to kind of give that a shot.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry to interrupt. That was a very, I was really mind struck with that investment in Fusion actually. And what was the team like? Did they have an idea? Did they have a prototype? And what made you invest in that? And looking at Fusion requires so much of money and so much of time. What made you invest in that? So
I'm glad this Fusion thing came up, because it explains that one of my previous answers, that 99% of the times we will not take a science risk. That 1% of the time we might do something like that. No. In the Fusion case, I'll just probably take a minute to talk about it. In this particular case, we saw a very strong co-founding team who had significant knowledge of the components that go into building this particular type of a fusion reactor. Right? So this was a different approach to building fusion using lasers. This particular methodology of building fusion is less than a decade old of sorts. It has not been significantly proven as such, but the team had significant expertise in the individual component stacks building it. But there was also someone who was a seasoned entrepreneur who knew how to run companies, who knew how to go out and sell products, sell vision rather, not sell products, but sell vision. So this was a combination of technology, experts, an entrepreneur who had built and scaled companies in the past, and there was access to significant lab equipment and infrastructure from institutions like institutions like IIT Madras and Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Hyderabad. So it was a combination of all these things, which for us made it a very a conducive set of components to explore fusion. Otherwise, we would probably not have done it, because it's like you said, it requires a large amount of capital, it requires significant periods of time, so on and so forth. But we ask, one of the ways that we decide on some of these investments is that, is this the best possible team to build this? Yes, it is a long shot, it is difficult, but are we placing our bets in the most apt people to do this, most qualified people to do this at that point of time? Yes, 2 years later, somebody else might come, but with what we know so far, is this the best possible team to do it? And for us, with our understanding of the ecosystem, that was the case, and hence we kind of went ahead.
Thank you.
Ishan asks how fund cycle affects investments. Very good question. I think would have wanted to explore this a little deeper. But let me give some context to Ishan's question, because I think this is an aspect that that founders don't necessarily think about. A VC fund is usually over a limited period of time. Typically in India, we've seen a 4-year investing cycle and a 4-year harvesting cycle. What that essentially means is that, let's say a VC fund raises $100 million, they have to invest that $100 million or a fraction of that $100 million within a certain period of time. That's usually 4 years, right? And then the next 4 years are spent in making returns from that investment. Why is this the case? Because we are custodians, as VC firms are custodians of somebody else's money, right? But like somebody gives us money to invest in startups, we have to return that capital. Think of it like a mutual fund agent of sorts, right? The mutual fund agent, essentially, you give money to this particular person, then that person decides which are the best options or best stocks or best funds to put money in. We do something similar, right? And that fund, the fund takes, the agent takes a certain cut for the work that he does, but his primary job is to make sure that he 2x's, 3x's, or whatever, 1.5x of the money that has been invested. So let's say, for example, I am in year 1 of my deployment. I raise my fund in December of 2024. I have 4 years to invest, let's say, $100 million. Now, I might take a bet on a company that can take 8 to 10 years to reap rewards when I'm in year 1, right? Because it gives me the entire duration of the fund cycle to see that investment and see how that goes. This is very commonly the case in, let's say, drug discovery, right? Drug discovery takes extremely long periods of time to do it, because you have to go through multiple animal trials and clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. All these take a significant period of time, and there are regulatory aspects involved. Now, if I do that investment in year 4, right? Not that I cannot do, but I have only 4 more years to get returns from that investment. But if I do it in year 1, I have about 8 years to do it, right? So sometimes some investments might be chosen because they fall within a certain period of time of the investment cycle of the fund itself. So very often we've seen a lot of startups getting rejected, or our own portfolio companies, when we send it to other investors for the subsequent fundraise, they say that, hey, we are nearing the end of our fund life cycle. We are not able to deploy capital at this point of time. Or we want to take different types of risks or different type of bets at this point of time. Something that can turn around in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, so on and so forth, as against something that will take 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. Right? So that there may be a lot of internal reasons as to why an investor might say no to your startup per se. I have 2 more questions, so maybe I'll just quickly do that. Dr. Sanjeev, sorry, this is taking a little longer.
No problem.
We can just wrap it up. But If the founders are not from a technical background and outsourcing product development work, is it better to include a technically backed founder? If not, will it affect the pitch? Abhay, I think the way to think about it is that where is the value being created? Who is creating the value, right? If all the work is essentially being done by somebody on the outside, then investors would think, why don't I invest in that person? Because that person knows how to. Yes, I agree, it is your vision and your team's vision as such. But it's very difficult for VCs to invest when somebody else is doing most of the value add or most of the work as such. I'm not saying setting vision I'm not saying that setting vision is easy, but the point that I'm trying to make is that VCs would prefer if most of the value is being created inside by the team, by the founders, or by the team that is being hired by the founders. Right? Is it better to include a technically backed founder? I would say yes. Investors will get a lot of confidence if there is a strong, technically savvy founder on the team. Is there a source where we can know which VC has raised funds recently to invest? There are a bunch of publications, but I don't think there's a centralized repository as such. Traction perhaps has a lot of these details, but these are all paid platforms. As an open platform, I'm not sure if there is anything available. But the few publications that kind of put this across are regularly cover all these things are VC Circle, Your Story. I don't know. I think those I'm blanking out at this point, but there are a couple of them that are definitely there. Yeah, I think that's largely what I have.
Yeah, you have covered almost all the questions. Thank you. And yes. I think whatever doubts these people will be having after this talk, at least those many doubts have gone. Okay. And your video will be also available on YouTube. I want to tell all the audience that you can even listen later also. So this kind of series will be continuing later on. Also, you can join as and when ARTpark announce through LinkedIn or social media. With that, let's thank to the speaker for an insightful talk, and really he has given basic information which is I don't think it is available anywhere. People to know how to go ahead for any VC, how to prepare the presentation, how to explain the product, kind of discussion. And almost the question session has gone more than the talk time. Okay, so that is also very much encouraging for these entrepreneurs and the startup founders. I would like to thank you, Sunil. Okay,
thank you, sir.
You and for your time. Really, you have given a lot of things. I understand your busy schedule. With that, I think we will close the session here and thank the ARTpark team also who has managed this very well. And Rich, I can tell you that people have come across the country here. I think I can see here many participants are there from outside Karnataka. Okay, so I think message has gone clearly. This is the need. Okay, thank you very much.
Wonderful,
all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
You have anything to add?